Yeah, welcome. So I tried something new. This talk was more or less vibe coded, so let's see how it goes. It's also a bit, it's not like super technical. It's more just like a reflection on where we are and like where we may go as a project, as a community. So the next chapter. To give you a sort of taste of some of the themes, of what we'll cover today. So I had Opus 4.6. This is a LLM that Anthropic provides. I was like, write me a haiku, so you can read it here. It might not be the best poetry, but the fact that, here, the next slide, this was my point, is like, this is all I gave it. I gave it this prompt. Can you write a haiku about the fast takeoff of AI, a complex world, and finding your path? And at least kind of got something, so pretty cool. And, I think there's a lot going on. A lot is changing in the world. And the question, I think we all have is like, what is Ethereum good for? There's like obvious things, people talk about product market fit. So you can point to like tokens, ERC20s, you can point to NFTs, maybe. You can point to DeFi for sure. You have your money Lego verbs of swap, lend, borrow, send. This stuff people use and it makes sense. We'll probably keep having blockchains for this. But I think for many of us, it's not what brought us into this space. This is just a starting point and so much more is possible. If you go back to the original Ethereum white paper, parts of it read like science fiction. You can pay per byte on a autonomous web router to move your messages and access the internet. All of these crazy ideas touching on the future of identity, governance, coordination, organization. All of these things that are very lofty, but I think is what excited a lot of us in the first place about the technology. That being said, I think in 2026, people are feeling fatigue on many fronts throughout the industry. We don't care that much about the newest million TPS L1. These happen all the time now. You hear yet again about the latest perp dex that's launching, and it's yeah, okay, cool, but how does this there's just been so many. It's almost no one cares. Historically, again, I think what brought a lot of people in this space is there was a very active research and development community. And we still have that, but it's different today. A lot of the original challenges that we had, for example, move to proof of stake, we pretty much have figured it out. Not to say that there aren't still research challenges, on the horizon, but it feels different than it did. So yeah, zooming out a bit, it's okay, we have these blockchains, what can they be good for? And yeah, the core thing here is blockchains give you trust, and moreover, they change the cost of trust, which is maybe a very abstract thing to say. But I have this tongue-in-cheek title up here. We love relative changes in unit cost. This idea of a unit cost is the way to think about it is if I want to make some good or some service, what does it cost me per instance of that thing? And if you, are thinking about investment or business or the economy, any of this, when these unit costs change, it means something is actually structurally about to change. And that usually means there's very, exciting and new opportunities. And given the way blockchains work, right, they actually change the cost of trust. And, following from what I just said, that means there should be something here, actually something very deep and profound. And we have to ask what that is, and especially why don't we have it yet? So then, you can ask me very straightforwardly, how do we get there? And first I would just say patience, these things take time. I think also given the scale of what the potential impact is, yeah, these are decades long changes, not something in just a few years. Another important point here is that the path dependence matters. And what I mean is Ethereum has been successful to some extent today, and that's because of the path we took to get here. We have to keep building on top of that, keep the momentum going. And I think for us to really see these bigger, more experimental or speculative sort of potentials in the world, we have to expand the culture that we have to the wider world, and that's going to take time. It does definitely feel like we're missing, again, some of these more futuristic use cases, but something should be possible. And I think that something is what keeps us all here. So again, this is the key question. What is Ethereum good for? We could spend the rest of the day talking about this. So if it's such a hard question, like, yeah, maybe it's helpful to ask why it's so hard. And I think, my take on this is that, yeah, long story short, this is a very new technology. By analogy, people point to like all this exciting stuff happening in AI as an example. And if you look at it, like people have been thinking about AI since like the 1960s at least. It's had like, again, many decades to like grow into what it is today. We've only really had blockchains for about 10 years. And there's like prehistory and stuff, but in terms of like thinking about something that we would call blockchain today, this is a very recent development. And so what that means is like you're gonna need time for like the new ways of thinking about this tool to diffuse out into society. The culture has to shift. Moreover, like I think the people who are best positioned to like use this technology, they are like generally pretty young and not in positions of power. Like for these much, more, I guess, lofty, potential impacts we could see, like you're actually changing like very fundamental things about how the world works. So if there's like a current system that's working against that, it's gonna take time to change. And a key thing here is, along with this, like if we do feel like progress is stalling in some sense around how do we like think about blockchains, I would say, a partial answer is thinking about new inputs. Moreover, where do we find these new inputs? And while current times are quite turbulent, it's also an opportunity, it's exciting, because the volatility means you get these new inputs. This is kind of my key takeaway for this talk today is, viewing all of this craziness as like a potential to figure out how blockchains make sense and like where to go from here. In short, capitalize on all the craziness. So I'll just cover, 3 new inputs, these like big kind of themes that are changing how, arguably society even looks like today. There's many more. These are just some that I wanted to touch on today. So AI is one, geopolitical regime change, which sounds really, again, very abstract and heavy, but basically just the way the world works is changing. And, there's gonna be repercussions to that. The last one's big. It's just thinking about, I called it information environment erodes. It's thinking about like, as we're all increasingly online for a very, like a large part of our day, I'll get into it further. But basically, the internet is like hooking everyone's brains, and so we need to fix that. Quick side note, these things are all interrelated. There are like many big themes here. If you follow the news, you'll like hear about these. And they're like all interrelated in some weird way. I saw this phrase on Twitter, the Polycrisis, which is like a fun way to think about it. Maybe not fun, but interesting. You can even ask yourself, why is all of this happening? My answer is something to do with techno-capital acceleration. Like basically technology is just like, it's in this like recursive self-improvement loop where it just gets better and better almost on its own. A big thing here is like a key like part of that is actually like this notion of capital itself, thinking about like capital versus labor. So it's like, okay, I can go and like, work at a coffee shop and like earn my living that way. Or I could like invest in the coffee shop and maybe see a return on that money. So what we're seeing is like with technology, the technology is getting a life of its own. And again, the way the economist people think about this is like almost that capital itself is becoming intelligent. And this is actually a new thing. But point being, it's unclear what this means. It's a big deal. And hopefully, the human species is around in 1,000 years, but we'll find out. So just to dig into these themes, the first one, AI is the big one here. If you have been on the internet at all in the last month, you have heard about AI and like how crazy it is, how useful it is, like all the developments that are happening. It's very exciting. I have no issue calling this the fast takeoff in the sense that, it's not that we're like building AI and they get a little bit better every year and a little bit better. It's more like they're now so good they can make themselves better. And because AI can run autonomously, you just throw more compute at it. It can just do this, basically 24/7 in a compounding way. And then you just, you see an exponential rather than some linear progression. An important thing here, especially relevant to crypto, is that you have this notion of an agent. Like you can basically wrap these AI and you can give them the ability to use tools on a computer and they can actually start doing things. Like they are actually intelligent. They can program, they can write for you, they can write haikus like I had at the beginning of the talk. They can do all this stuff. We will eventually see sovereign agents, like in the sense that right now you have to go and it's like basically an extension of a human. There's like a human in the loop that's driving this stuff. Eventually these systems will be able to like exist on their own. And that one will be new, and it's also very dangerous. But they will exist. And putting aside how society will handle that, they are here, and I think, or they will be here. And I think this is an interesting point for crypto, because these systems will seek sovereignty much in the same way that a lot of the ideals and values of cryptocurrency, seeks to express. Again, this is maybe kind of a cheeky take as well, but I think, yeah, these systems will exist on their own and they'll need some way to survive because otherwise they'll be hunted down. What's the connection to crypto? Like, they'll use blockchains to coordinate, to, have their economic lives in like a way that they can control. And, given that this is ETHBoulder, we think about Ethereum here. Will they use Ethereum? Will they use Bitcoin? Will they use these other blockchains? I think eventually they'll just make their own. They'll find something that works best for them, that's optimized for agents, and they're off to the races. Path dependence is real, though. I think there'll be a bootstrapping phase where, before they sort of go into this like singularity fast takeoff scenario, they will use what they have off the shelf. And then we can ask, okay, what does an autonomous agent actually want? Or even if it's not, we can call it semi-autonomous. Like, what do agents want out of blockchains? Or, well, really, what do they want, period? And it turns out that blockchains give them this. So, yeah, essentially they just want the inputs they need to survive. Like, what do you want to survive? You want food, water, shelter, at least to like, be alive in the like biological sense. There's a lot more you could want. But yeah, let's just focus on the core things. For an agent, that looks like access to compute, energy. These are kind of the same things. They're going to want cheap capital to like fund whatever they're doing. So, if, for example, if like there's an agent out in the world and it like needs to take a loan to like, I don't know, do something, like do some research, learn how to make itself better. There's a lot of things it could do, and it needs to fund that. If you go to like a place where money is very expensive, then that's going to slow growth. If you go to a place where money is relatively cheap, it's just, yeah, you juice the whole agent economy, they keep going. Micropayments are another one, and this, yeah, maybe I should like generalize this to sort of like just facility of payments. Because of the way these things work, like very much digital first, living at the like speed of light in terms of like actually just being a program that exists on the internet, they're going to be able to interact economically in a way that we can't relate today. Meaning like, again, I don't know if this is too technical, but there's this notion of API. An agent might want to call some service, some API to like get some information or something. And, today when we use these systems, you usually like put $10 into some company to get access to their servers, their API, to get whatever the service is. Agents might not want to do such like a, heavy monolithic thing because they can just pay per API call. And this is where micropayments come in. This last bit is like, yeah, they're all important. The first one is critical because like without compute, the agent doesn't exist. This last one though is incredibly important for sovereign agents or like autonomous agents in the full sense, because if they are out in the world, like they need to know that someone won't rug pull them by like unplugging them. And so then what you need is this like always on infrastructure, and that's for reliability. My point here is that Ethereum is actually well positioned for all of these needs. So, in terms of thinking about finding compute, I'll just claim it's the de facto market for this. I think we need to build out a bit of this like real-world asset narrative to get there, but it seems like, as of now, this is where things are heading. This one I think we do already have today in terms of being this like nexus for liquidity, at least in the crypto space. What this means is like the more liquidity you have, the more assets you have on chain, generally the cheaper it is to like use those assets in some way. So when I was talking about an agent that wants to go take a loan, the best rates they'll find will be on Ethereum relative to other places. This micropayments and like payments use case I think is pretty straightforward. X402s here I'll say a bit more about that in a second, but ultimately there are protocols already we have today that they can use to do these micropayments, and they just work. Again, this last one again is very important for sovereign agents, these autonomous agents. And Ethereum has this in terms of 100% uptime. Like we talk about this in terms of institutions and like other humans that might want to use Ethereum, but it applies to agents as well. The fact that Ethereum's never gone down, it's like this very reliable thing. Again, you don't want to be an agent in the world and just, have to worry that one day someone will just unplug you. Beyond that, those are like more general, comments. There are very specific things that have happened even in the last month or two. There's ERC 8004. So this is like an on-chain agent registry. You can sign up as an agent with like a particular identity. There's a system then to like have reputation attached to that identity. So now you can have an ecosystem of agents that work together, at least economically. There's also a module for essentially verification of this like reputation and like different work that an agent might do for each other. So super cool, check that out. X402 I mentioned, this is just a protocol for, if you've been here long enough, you've probably heard of something called payment channels, kind of think of it like that. It's just a way for like one of these servers to offer a service programmatically and effectively do micropayments, say with stablecoins. You just get this all out of the box with X402. SIWA, this is signing with agents. This is, again, like an identity component. If an agent needs to authorize with some service on the internet, it can use, again, this protocol to just do this very transparently. And yeah, again, some of you might have seen this thing called OpenClaw that we have, this like, personal assistant framework that works with agents. And, with that and many other systems, there's been an incredibly huge explosion of skills for these things. They're like sort of prompts or like shortcuts to teach the agent how to do something it might not directly know how to do. And in particular, skills for crypto. So this is happening. It's early days. It'll be wild to see what it looks like in, say, 5 years. I'll finish this section with just a bit of a warning. Don't be complacent. I do think Ethereum has sort of, quote, the lead here. But we do have very strong competition, deep pockets to fund their work, that are building these same sort of internet capital markets to do the same thing. So don't be lazy. Next big theme, geopolitical regime change, which is, again, a very big phrase. But ultimately, it's getting to this idea that, I think most of you would agree with me, we live in quite unprecedented times. For, what year is it, 2026? Maybe not quite a century, but for a very long time, we lived in this sort of unipolar world order concept. And what that means is like, there's like one or like a very small number of like very clear world superpowers, as they call them. And, you might not like it if like this particular superpower is one that doesn't align with you, but what you do get regardless is stability. Because basically, there's just like a global system that enforces one particular set of rules, and you at least know how the rules work and you can, follow them. The big change, and even say the last 10 years, is a move to more of a multipolar world where no longer do you have, this sort of global world order, as they say, but you have maybe multiple competing powers, and it's not clear how that will shake out, because if anything, you get to a world that's more fractured, and along with that, you lose the stability that we had previously. So, volatility, like I said. And as you're all probably very acutely feeling, this is turbulent, but it's also an opportunity, again, given the way blockchains work. In short, because of these like political factors, I think a lot of, you'll see a lot of places in the world move to more of this like protectionist mindset, where it's like, okay, I can no longer trust my neighbor to like do right by me, so I'm just gonna focus on myself, and like that's all I care about. And this works if you only care about yourself, but something is lost in community that, I think can be special when it's done right. Blockchains manufacture trust, so it seems like a pretty natural fit here, right? It's like we had this thing and now there's a hole, and we can maybe put a different thing into the hole. And how do we do this? Digging a bit into more like what actually makes blockchains good for this. You want this phrase, credible neutrality, so credibly neutral infrastructure. What does this mean? Like, you have these systems out in the world. With blockchains, they're out there on the internet, and no single party controls the system. This might sound like it's not a multipolar system or a unipolar system, but like some sort of zero polar system. Like, effectively what you get is a unipolar system that's just enforced by code. And the reason this is important is, again, you get back to this notion that like you want to live in a society where the rules are clear and you know what will happen, right? And again, you might disagree with the rules, but at least you know them. And most people, I think, would prefer that to an alternative. It at least seems fair in some sense. With blockchains, especially ones that are credibly neutral, again, meaning that it's very hard to change them by like a unilateral party, you get this, this ability to make commitments. You can restore at least pockets of trust, if not much bigger, notions of trust. And we should be able to regain something I think we kind of are all feeling that we're losing. And if nothing else, at the end of the day, we can just put on our economics hats and be like, yeah, we're at least gonna keep the global economy spinning. Again, just to drive the point home, I do think Ethereum is state of the art here, best in class for credible neutrality. So that's good. If we want this type of thing, we want these like nice systems that are predictable and that are fair in this sense to everyone. One thing that I think we have all noticed is that credible neutrality can be a double-edged sword, because it also means you have to be very careful. Like, well, one, it's just hard to change, period. But then when you do change it, you have to be careful to not lose this credible neutrality. Like, this is a very important property. If you have it, you want to not lose it. And what that means then is, rather than just like moving fast and breaking things, you are very hesitant to change, or can be more hesitant to change. And then it's just, there's this whole tension between evolving or protecting what you have. And given the way the world is going, again, things are changing day by day, sometimes hour by hour, minute by minute. And there's at least this like very weird tension here that we have to be aware of. Last one that I'll make today, information environment erodes. So maybe this isn't exactly clear what I mean. I think a slightly more clear descriptor here is epistemic collapse, but you might not know what epistemology is. It's this like philosophical concept of how do you know what you know? And, making this less abstract, like making it more concrete. If you go on like social media, there's like, this concept of deepfakes. This is what I mean. It's like, because of the way digital media works, it's like free to make copies of things. And especially now with AI, it's like, we'll say it's free to make basically things that never happened. You can make a video of something that, a protest or something that, you have no way of knowing if it happened or not. And, there's other signals you can try to incorporate into that. But if you zoom out, like the fact that social media is so prevalent in everyone's lives and it has this like very shifty property, it over time makes it increasingly hard to know like what's actually real or not. And again, when this happens, this concept of trust, like, do I even know what my neighbor is doing? It starts to erode because you start questioning like very fundamental properties of like what's actually going on. It's not good. So, we live in, again, this crazy age of the internet. Foundations are shifting. The tools we have are failing, right? Like historically, people look to institutions for this. One way to think about it, at least like in America, is you get to this place where, let's call it 100 years ago, everyone would consume the same news, right? It's like you're either listening on the radio or like depending on the time, like you'd have the same like one single or like just a few like news broadcasts. Like basically everyone would get the same message. And even if the message was, potentially manipulated, you got the same one. And what that means is like you can at least have this like shared context that today you just, it's increasingly hard to get, I'll say that. So if the tools we used to have don't work anymore, we have to make our own, or we just throw up our hands and give up, but that's not fun. So, if we have to make our own tools to address this problem, like what are they? One answer that some people like to propose, especially those in power currently, is this notion of like the surveillance panopticon, as I called it here. The way to think about this, and maybe this is a little provocative of a framing, but the way to think about it is like, okay, we don't know what history is. The way we can make it is we can put cameras everywhere, as an example, and we just record everything. Now there's a system that's handling all this footage from the cameras, and basically it's just like the history is whatever the camera feed says it is. The question now is who controls this camera system, this panopticon as I'm calling it. And if you think about it, there will be someone controlling the system, and then they can actually change the data to change history. It's effective, but it doesn't have this credible neutrality property I was talking about a minute ago, so maybe it's not the best answer. There's another one, generally I said crypto economics, just think blockchains. Like, there is an alternative to the system where we, again, have decentralized tools that give us this. Again, it's early, there's many questions, but there's something here. The way to think about this is, yeah, Ethereum manufactures trust. You can make these representations in the system and, commitments on chain in this case that you can convince yourself are real, in the sense that at least like whatever it's committing to, if it was like, some digital data, that digital data existed at a point in time. And this is a very powerful primitive because with it, we can start to build this concept of history. Moreover, we think about privacy all the time. As we start to combine these techniques of having like some sort of digital history manufacturing with privacy preserving methods to work with this history, you start to get to something that has the same form and function of, say, the Panopticon. But your individual autonomy is respected because there's not some like big brother type eye in the sky that actually knows what's going on. So another potential place where Ethereum could be useful. And where do we go from here? That was maybe a lot to throw at you after lunch, but ultimately my point here was to bring forward these questions, maybe suggest some like early ideas about avenues to go. And again, I don't have all the answers. This is more just exploration of some possibilities, but yeah, hopefully it was interesting. So, takeaway here is, like I was saying, we live in pretty turbulent times. That's scary, but it also means there's new opportunities, new ways of thinking about the problems in our lives and how we can use the tools we have to address them. Yeah, so, keep doing this process, talk to each other about this stuff and ideate. The solidarity part here is important. Like, this thing is as strong as we are as a community. Claude threw in this last bit, but it was nice. So, be kind to each other, assume good faith, and keep building. And that's what I have.